Hello and welcome to ABP Live. I have with me today Ambassador Talmiz Ahmad. He's been India's ambassador to Saudi Arabia twice. He's regarded to be an expert on West Asia. His book, West Asia at War, has already talked about so many issues that we are facing and we are seeing today happening between Israel and Palestine. We will discuss with him the ongoing crisis and whether or not there is a solution to that. Welcome to ABP Live, sir,
Thank
and
you
thank
very
you
much,
so much for
Nayanima.
talking.
Yes.
So, to begin with, now what we heard from the day the attack started by Hamas on Israel, everybody, the world said, "Oh, we were shocked, we were surprised," but we knew the issues that have been going on for the last more than 5 decades between Israel and Palestine. What Hamas did, how do you see that? And for an expert like you, did it really come as a shock?
We are all deeply surprised by the scale of the assault. We all knew that there will be a response to the increasing aggressiveness of the settlers and the increasing desecration of the Al-Aqsa. We knew that. But none of us could have anticipated the enormous scale of the assault. They have entered into Israeli territory from 22 locations. They have gone deep inside Israel up to 25 kilometers. They were able to break through the borders. They were able to cross through the electronic sensors. There were a lot of security personnel whom they were able to kill immediately. They were able to take hostages, go back into Gaza from where they had come. All this is absolutely astonishing. The Israelis themselves are shocked. There are already people saying that they spent $1 billion on that fence and it was knocked down with a tractor. There were people then able to cut through the barbed wire.
Correct.
There were supposed to be entire battalions guarding different parts of that. Where were they? The questions being asked about this.
Right.
So all of this is a shock. We are stunned by the scale of the assault. It is like a military assault. And there has been a perception, oh, Hamas, ragtag group, some militants come here and there. They have mobilized huge number of people. Number one, 5,000 rockets in 20 minutes, they pierced through the Iron Dome and were able to inflict a lot of
Right.
damage. Also, the scale all across the country, the explosions have gone all the way from Ashkelon to Tel Aviv to Jerusalem.
Right.
So, yes, it is the scale that is shocking. And it is a serious failure. If we could criticize the Israeli government politically for its failures and its misconduct, this is a serious military and intelligence failure as well. So it's a
Right.
comprehensive failure of a country that has prided itself on being invincible.
That is very true, sir. And I was coming to that this is also being seen as a complete failure of Mossad and also the Israeli Defense Forces. But since you are also talking about the scale, sir, and that's what has really shaken the world, do you think what the Hamas did right now with this kind of scale of attack and violence, do you think that this has created more trouble for the Palestinians to actually achieve their cause and take it forward?
Very difficult to respond to this because this has been going on for very, very long time. What we are surprised about is the counter attack from the Palestinian side.
Right.
The Israelis have been carrying out massive destruction, ruthless assault, depredations across Palestinian territories for what, 30 years? And they have been, every time there was a few rockets fired at them, they would assault. They would have a kill rate, as they called it, of 1:20, 1:30, 1:40, killing people. I mean, if you recall, only in the last 15, 20 years, look at the operations the Israelis have carried out, and several hundred people have been killed. So it is not as if the Palestinian cause and Palestinian aspirations are connected with this. As far as we can see, Israel has no interest whatsoever in any political settlement. It lives from day to day. It does not have any strategic vision. It's only concerned about protecting itself as of now. I think that has been damaged. And therefore, you can say, it is a strategic triumph as far as Hamas is concerned. What it does for the Palestinian cause, we will know very quickly and we can talk about it. But as far as the invincibility of the Israelis is concerned, I think that has been seriously damaged, and it will be investigated and it will be introspected about for many years to come. Many heads will roll. And people, I hope what will happen is at some stage, some people in Israel start thinking seriously about how do you manage? Can you live forever in this way? That you go and kill a few hundred people, they come back. Already 1,200 Israelis are dead. Never happened before. So the Israelis were very complacent that we can kill several of them and we have impunity. But I hope that somehow there will be some wisdom will emerge. There's no evidence of it, but I just hope, that's all.
So, also coming to the fact that, and also for the benefit of our viewers, what is the situation, what has been the situation, going forward, what will happen, that only time will tell. But in terms of the geography of that place, the Gaza Strip, and how, the Palestinians live there, what has been going on in terms of Israeli occupation constantly, the tensions around West Bank, if you can touch upon those, sir.
You see, there are two large spaces of occupied territories, and the third is East Jerusalem. These were occupied in 1967. West Bank has 3.7 million Palestinians, and Gaza has 2.3 million Palestinians. If you count these two and the Palestinians who have Israeli nationality, you are looking at 7 million Palestinians, 7 million plus. They are more than the Jewish population of Israel. That is the combined population of Israel and the occupied territories. The Arabs are already at least 1 million more than the Jewish population. And this is the core issue. You have these two areas. As far as West Bank is concerned, what the Israelis are trying to do is what they call create realities on the ground. Keep on pumping in more and more settlers, more and more settlers. It is illegal, as we know, because occupied territories cannot be depopulated of the local community and new people put in there. Already you know that a little while ago there were 500,000 settlers. Now that number seems to have gone up to about 700,000. And the new extreme right-wing government of Netanyahu wants to make it 1 million settlers. That means they want to create such realities on the ground that the prospect of an independent Palestinian state withers away straight away. Looking at Gaza, that used to have about a few thousand Israeli settlers as well. Extremely right-wing, extremely rabid. They were real zealots as well. But what the Israelis found is to protect these 3,000-4,000 settlers amidst a population of over 2 million required several thousand soldiers. It was not worth it. Therefore, in 2006, the Israelis decided to withdraw from Gaza. So, technically, there is no Israeli presence within Gaza, and those few settlers were then forcibly removed. But what the Israelis have done is to genuinely create a prison, because the Israelis control all access to the Gaza Strip. And Egypt controls that little passageway at the Egyptian border. Therefore, these 2.3 million people are living in a prison. There is no doubt about it. They live in the most squalid conditions possible. Electricity is controlled by the Israelis. Everything, coming and going is controlled by them. Food supplies are controlled by them. And as you know, now they have grandly announced a complete siege. What is a complete siege? It was always there. What used to happen is 20,000 Israelis, 20,000 Gazans used to come across to do menial work within Israel. That will now again be stopped. 20,000 in a population of 2.3 million. All food comes from outside, all electricity comes from outside. So you are truly beleaguered. Also, there is another very interesting point. Gaza is on the coast. It's on the Mediterranean coast.
Yes.
It has access to, it owns gas reserves, which are its own. If the Israelis were to allow the development of those gas reserves, Gaza would be completely economically independent. But that is what they don't want. So you have an Israeli withdrawal that has physically taken place, but it is a prison house. And there's a miserable life. 45 to 50% of the people are, unemployed. Young people, 75% are unemployed. What do you do? There's a simmering anger. Daily humiliation, simmering anger, periodic acts of violence. In this misery, this is the misery that has created the violence that we are looking at today.
Mhm. So very valid points, but also since you talked about the fact that uh, the Israelis don't really want a settlement, then it brings into question the validity of the Oslo Accord, right? Do you think they still believe in that? Is there any validity to it? And especially after this attack, it will be more difficult to bring them on
Well,
the
see,
table.
now, Oslo Accords of 1993 and 95 were an interim arrangement.
Right.
They were supposed to prepare the ground for something important in the future, a lasting peace.
Hmm.
These preliminary discussions and certain arrangements had to take place. What happened and what is the crucial aspect of Oslo? The Palestine Liberation Organization recognized Israel as a legal entity.
Hmm. Right.
And in response, Israel recognized the PLO as the sole and legitimate representative of the Palestinian people. So, this was the fundamental achievement as far as Oslo is concerned. It removed a lot of previous, animosity.
Hmm.
Palestinians used to say Israel has no right to exist, and these people and the Israelis used to call the Palestinian Liberation Organization as a terrorist organization, and
Hmm.
used to declare they have Yasser Arafat is not an interlocutor who is acceptable. You
Hmm.
can't talk to anybody. This kind of that was done away with.
Hmm.
And then there were certain support institutions that had emerged. You had, for example, the setting up of the Palestine Authority in Ramallah. A
Right.
degree of self governance was provided at that time. And then, of course, you had a Palestinian security force. You were to have a Palestinian assembly that would have elections from time to time, and the people would have a right to express them. All this was interim. But do recall here, September 1995, Yitzhak Rabin, the Israeli Prime Minister, signs Oslo II. In 2 months, he's assassinated
Yes.
by an extreme right wing
Hmm.
character who enjoyed considerable support from the predecessors of the very people who are now ruling Israel.
Hmm.
Remember, this is the crucial point that young man who shot, who shot Yitzhak Rabin is the predecessor of these people. So now you find what happens is all serious attempts, let me say, all serious attempts to have a settlement of the Palestinian issue on long-term basis, what is called final status accord, final status issues.
Hmm.
There were three final status issues that were recognized at Oslo, and they were number one, a realization of a sovereign and viable Palestinian state living side by side with the Israeli state. Number one. Number two, this state would have East Jerusalem as its capital. And number three, refugees who had been deprived of their home and were living as refugees in different parts, they would have a right of return. These were the
Hmm.
three final status issues. There were going to be differences on this, but these were at least the door was open to take a look at them. Clinton made an attempt at Camp David too in year 2000 to address some of them. But there were serious problems. It has suited Israel and the Americans to blame the Palestinians for the failure of Camp David too. But there were many serious flaws in that arrangement.
Hmm.
And today, IR scholars look at that conference as a model for how not to conduct serious discussions.
Hmm.
The main point is both of these presidents, I mean, the president and the Israeli prime minister, were very weak politically at home. Yes, I mean, Clinton had completed his term, and indeed, the Democratic candidate had lost. There was going to be George Bush who was going to be
Hmm.
president. So he had no credibility as an interlocutor. Ehud Barak was very weak at home and desperately needed an agreement to be a credible candidate, at a time when the right was coming up. Ariel Sharon was leading from the
Yes.
front at that time. There was no way it was going anywhere. And then, of course, they were not willing to look at East Jerusalem. How could Yasser Arafat give up East Jerusalem? I mean, he got phone calls from the Arab world, including from Crown Prince Abdullah. I was at that time in Saudi Arabia. Crown Prince Abdullah phoned Yasser Arafat and said, Jerusalem is not for you to negotiate. It doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the Muslim people. That means it's not for a Palestinian leader to be negotiating the status of Jerusalem. So these were the last. I never took it. I don't believe it was a serious attempt. It was a desperate attempt, certainly, for the political fortunes of various people. Clinton looking at his legacy, tarnished by various misdemeanors on his part. Ehud Barak looking to salvage his political career. Yasser Arafat did his best. But the maximum offered to him in terms of West Bank was not even minimally acceptable. There was no sign of a sovereign and viable state.
Right.
What were they offering? They were offering little cantons which are there today. That means there is no contiguity. It is like these wretched homelands. You remember in the apartheid state of South Africa, they had created the so-called TBVC states. They are supposed to be homelands of the black people. And then you would retain the Republic of South Africa. But at that time, so this is something similar. That you have this huge Palestinian population living as not second class, third class citizens in occupied territories with no viable state of their own. Historically, we would say that that was the last attempt, not serious attempt, last attempt at a settlement of the final status issue. From there, the right wing has dominated Israeli politics. Initially through the Likud, but gradually you can see that the ultra-nationalist and the ultra-religious parties have been coming up. They were always at the margins. They used to have a few seats. Even today, there are 14 seats in a house of 120. But to get a majority in a divided political order, Netanyahu opted to co-opt them into government so that he could become prime minister and save himself from criminal proceedings that were underway at that time.
Right. So I was just coming to that when Netanyahu came into power, and the fact that there was a Trump in America and they unitedly announced Jerusalem as the capital, do you think that was the germination of what we are seeing today?
What we are seeing today goes back to the 1990s and the failure of the Israeli government and the Israeli people to address the Palestinian issue seriously. That's the core issue.
Yes.
All the rest are matters of detail. Now, what happens is the issue of Israel, the state of Israel, is not a foreign policy issue as far as the Americans are concerned. It is a domestic issue. It is a deep part of their political order at home. Israel has seeped deep into the political establishment, security establishment, all the, even congressmen, individual congressmen and petty, every one of them is either is required to be publicly totally committed to Israel, or if he or she ever makes the mistake of mildly criticizing Israel about something, they're immediately called anti-Semitic. What you have today in Israel, and it has been brewing for some time, what you have today in the United States and what has been brewing for some time is deeper and deeper polarization of the right. You can't call it left, you have to say quote unquote liberal. On Israel, there is a broad consensus in the American political order. You have seen what President Biden has been speaking, a completely nauseating set of statements, deliberately blind to the atrocities that the Israelis have perpetrated on the Palestinians, and has referred to such extreme language like Hamas is evil, Hamas is savage, there is ISIS type of savagery, the Pentagon says. This kind of extreme language is more to pander to the domestic
But
opinion.
then, sir, how do you define Hamas today?
Hamas is an organization that is a resistant organization. It is a resistance body against occupation, and it emerged in 1987. It's initially it had its ideological base was committed to an Islamist approach, broadly emerging from the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood believes that a state order should be influenced by Islamic principles. This was to set it off against the Fatah and the PLO in general, which was secular. So, yes, Hamas was Islamist. But over a period of time, as Fatah has deteriorated in credibility and standing, Hamas's Islamic credentials are much weaker now, much less significant. It is now projecting itself as the most significant source of Palestinian resistance to occupation. So, yes, I would regard that as a resistance movement. It also has political it has political aspirations as well. As you know, many of these militant organizations also have a political arm. You saw this in the case of Egypt, that Muslim Brotherhood had a
Yes.
party that stood for elections. Even Fatah became a part of the political order. Hezbollah in Lebanon is also part of the political order as people fight for elections and hold position. Hamas aspires to the same situation where it is looking for an opportunity when there are free elections for the Palestine Authority, for the Palestine National Assembly. It would like to be a significant political presence as well. As of now, its appeal is confined to the Gaza area, and that West Bank so far is dominated by the Fatah and by the Palestine Authority that represents Fatah. But I want to also remind you here, as Fatah has deteriorated in credibility, Hamas's appeal in the West Bank is increasing as well. A frustrated, abused and frustrated Palestinian community is looking for a credible source of resistance. And that is now increasingly seen as Hamas.
So, but then what is I would say the role of PLO? Where do they stand?
PLO, that's what I'm trying to say, that the PLO that we knew when there was Yasser Arafat is today a shadow of its former self, to use a cliche. Mahmoud Abbas was an old associate of Yasser Arafat, and there was a lot of promise at one time. But he was elected for a few years, but today, with all sorrow, I must say that he's a pathetic figure. He commands no credibility, he has no standing, he has no influence on Palestinian affairs. He is an extremely feeble, discredited, and even illegitimate leader as of now. And there has been no inspiration. The Palestinian people desperately, in their extremely beleaguered scenario, they are desperately looking for someone who would lead them forward, come up with fresh ideas, come up with a credibility that you can negotiate. You also need people who can project the Palestinian point of view effectively. I believe even that is not happening today. Most of the discourse, I know, is automatically controlled by the Israelis, supported by the Americans and the Europeans. So yes, they do control the waves. I have noted with some concern, for example, that the discourse emerging from the West relating to Israel and the recent war has a broad consensus, exactly the same Western consensus that you see with regard to the Ukraine war. That means the West has clubbed together and banded together. The kind of free discussion that we used to have is now much less evident as far as Western sources are. So the control over discourse is very clear these days. And that is where I feel if you had a credible leadership, I'm not saying Hamas is going to be that automatically a significant leadership, not yet. But if you had an effective and credible leadership, you should be able to develop a discourse that is heard with respect in different parts of the world.
Sir, and also if I can ask you on the fact that what every everybody is now sort of discussing is the fact how Hamas made an entry like this, penetrating deep inside Israeli territory. Uh, and Israel has now said that they could do so because they got exceptional kind of training and even arms through Iran. How do you see that? What is your
I,
view, and
I, I have
how did
noted
Hamas
this.
enter like that?
This is part of the emerging Western discourse. As you know, Iran is automatically the other. It is the sworn enemy as far as Israel is concerned. It is the demonized other as far as the United States is concerned. And therefore, when you have this scenario in Israel of a smashed military force, a discredited political leadership, they are desperately looking for scapegoats. They're looking for alibis. And
Mhm.
immediately, who comes to your mind immediately? Iran. It has to be Iran because they are discrediting the Hamas and the Palestinian aspirations, the Palestinian people, as if they in themselves are thoroughly incompetent and incapable of projecting their own interests. Has there been an affiliation between Hamas and Iran? It is well known. It has been going on for several years. Could there have been a certain degree of training? Almost certainly there would have been. But is Iran responsible for the present assault? Certainly not. Blinken has said that, many Israelis have said that also. But the kind of mischief that is being done by the American right wing and certain sections of the Israeli right wing is to say Iran planned everything, that Iran gave the green signal, that there were
Mhm.
meetings together on this
Mhm.
attack. I doubt that. I doubt that very much. I would say what has happened is, let us not, just because the Israelis fail to protect themselves, doesn't mean that their enemy is so feeble that they need to depend on us. The other thing is equally concerning, isn't it? Not within one day of the fighting, the Americans announced that they are shipping military supplies to the Israelis. Is Israel so poorly equipped that it can't fight Hamas for beyond a day? And today, since then, you are seeing more and more reports of American weaponry reaching Israel. What kind of situation is that? And why is nobody questioning that? Americans are allowed to ship huge quantities of weapons to Israel, but Hamas is not allowed to talk to anybody about developing its own capacities and its own capabilities. What nonsense is that? This is a completely one-sided. My own view is Iran has supported Hamas. It is part of its agenda, as part of its resistance front, which includes Syria and sections within Iraq and Hezbollah and Hamas. It is not a secret. It has been well known. And I think this is also known, but there is no suggestion, there is no proof today. Just because Wall Street Journal gives a very poorly written and poorly edited article of, without naming anybody, very weak sources, just putting certain statements in quotation marks, that it becomes gospel truth. An extreme right wing paper, an extreme right wing source, which has to quote Blinken saying that there is no evidence of Iranian involvement.
Mhm. So you'd been in Saudi Arabia for such a long time. This time we are seeing Saudis taking a very kind of so-called balanced approach. Um, do you think under MBS they are trying to play the role of a mediator? Let's not escalate it, because the statements coming from Saudis had been rather strange. How do you view that?
The Saudis had progressed quite far with regard to the normalization efforts. There has been, particularly since the Beijing Accords were announced in March 2023, and normalization of Iran Saudi relations approved and moderated, mediated by the Chinese. Ever since then, I have noticed the Americans running helter skelter all across West Asia, wanting to retrieve their situation. But this accord was not the beginning of a process. It is a large part of a process that has been going on from 2020 and which the Americans completely missed. They took it for granted that this region belongs to them. West Asia belongs to them. It doesn't. All of us who have been following West Asia, and I have written about it very extensively, all of us know that from the towards the end of 2020, as the Trump regime came to an end, Saudi Arabia and many other countries of West Asia decided to shrug off the American yoke and pursue foreign policy initiatives on their own without any involvement of the Americans. And Saudi Arabia then normalized ties with Qatar. The blockade was removed. It then announced a ceasefire with Yemen. It opened up engagements with the Turks. And also, above all, from April 2021, they started talking to the Iranians. And that engagement went on for about a year. After that, there was a slight hiatus, but then the Saudis approached the Chinese, and you have the Beijing Accord in March this year. So Saudis have moved on. I have used the word strategic autonomy. They have asserted strategic autonomy. Till now, they were allies of the Americans. They are not anymore. The kind of engagements they have, China, Russia, India, and looking at others. They're looking at a maritime engagement as well. MBS has been traveling to different parts and giving this message. They are not abandoning the Americans, they're only treating the Americans as just one more relationship amongst many other important ones. What the American initiatives since the Beijing Accord has been to pull the Saudis back and to create a situation that existed earlier, where the Americans were the hegemons in the region. I believe that day has gone, that period has gone, and the Americans don't recognize it. So what you see are these very pathetic shows of diplomatic activity as an end in itself. So they push this. They push normalization. The Saudis put certain conditions on the table. Those conditions have nothing to do with Israel or with the Palestinian issue. They were all aimed at enhancing Saudi capabilities, security capabilities. My view is, it's a personal view, my view is Saudi Arabia was hoping, as a result largely of obtaining some advanced weaponry and obtaining the capacity to actually develop some of this weaponry at home and as part of its defense industry, and also getting the civilian nuclear capability, it felt that it would be better placed in terms of its longer term engagement with the Iranians. I don't believe the Saudis had any faith in the Americans providing them long term security guarantees. Indeed, the absence of this kind of credibility, which was apparent during Obama and Trump's regimes, was the one that that had pushed the Saudis to to start asserting their strategic autonomy. So I think what they had progressed with regard to normalization, and there were reports from the Western side that that the announcement of diplomatic ties was imminent. We don't know, because there is no evidence even now that many of those issues relating to the implementation of the three conditions had actually been achieved. But the Gaza war has ended that for now. The Saudis, if they were muted earlier on the Palestine issue in the public domain, now recognize the need to be much clearer, much more emphatic, much more credible with regard to their commitment to the Palestinian cause. This also resonates with the broad public opinion all across West Asia. You cannot have a leader so far away from the wishes of his people. So I think there is broad support for the Palestinian cause as far as the popular opinion is concerned. Saudi Arabia recognized that. The statement is to emphasize the importance of addressing Palestinian sensitivities. And they have mentioned that there had been abuse of their sanctities, and which is a reference to the Al-Aqsa Mosque and to the atrocities of the West Bank, which are well recorded and well documented. They have gone ahead. Their media has started talking about the central importance of the two-state solution. May or may not happen, but the Saudis are now going, if there was any doubt of where the Saudis stood, it is being cleared. It's now become very clear that they have gone back to their traditional posture. I'm not saying that they are calling for the Arab Peace Initiative to be revived in its old form. Already 22 years have passed since it was announced. Maybe something updated, but there has to be a serious concern with regard to I mean, there must be a Palestinian state
Right, right,
where Palestinians can live with dignity, not as third class citizens who are constantly abused at any time a settler feels like comes and whacks them or shoots at them. You know that already in the first half of this year, 200 Palestinians have been killed in the West Bank. There are 600 episodes of fighting initiated by the settlers. There are numerous episodes of the security forces, Israeli security force, using helicopters against the Palestinians and then also using drones to kill certain people. This is not acceptable. And you have to pay the price. Even the Americans can't protect you all the time when you have these rabid settlers constantly picking up guns and killing people. So I think that the Saudis are now asserting the position that about which certain doubts had emerged earlier. And these doubts were largely highlighted in the Western media that the Saudis no longer care for the Palestinians, that they have moved on, their other interests are more significant, etc. Saudi statements today are correcting that impression.
Mhm. Well, sir, thank you so much for giving that Saudi, explanation to us, because that was becoming a little area where people are questioning. Now, coming to India's role that India is trying to play, or maybe they don't want to play, but we've seen Prime Minister giving two messages. There has been no official statement as such, but there has been a phone call between Prime Minister Netanyahu and Prime Minister Modi, where he said that Prime Minister Modi said that I stand with Israel. But does that also question the fact that is India rethinking on the two-state solution theory? What is the role that India should play, or you think India may not have to play? Because Israel is an important ally for us now.
There have been two statements from the Prime Minister. One was a quotation within a few hours of the attack, and I believe that was a spontaneous and emotional response from the Prime Minister. He has very close ties with Israel as a nation and very close personal ties with Netanyahu. And as he saw the reports of this massive assault and the killing of even 200 or 300 Israelis, he spontaneously made certain remarks. And in which he referred to Hamas specifically as a terrorist organization. A few days later, there was a phone call to him from Netanyahu, very likely to thank the Prime Minister for his support. The statement that the PM has now given, or PM's office has given, is much more cautious and much less emotive. It is basically that there was a conversation and that the Prime Minister says that the Indian people support the Israeli, and then he doesn't speak anything about Hamas being a terrorist organization, just simply condemns terrorism. This is the factual position. Uh, a Prime Minister has a right to speak on behalf of the people he leads who have put him in office. Whether it is exactly accurate or not, very rarely is there a census or a poll taken. Recall here that Prime Minister Manmohan Singh told George Bush that the Indian people admire him and support him. This came as a shock both to to the President George Bush and to the Indian people. I don't think we should exaggerate the literal importance of this. The importance is that Prime Minister's office have recognized that charging anyone or describing anyone which is a resistance organization as a terrorist is uncalled for and can be misunderstood. For the rest, I have said this many times and I have to repeat this to you today. India's approach to West Asia is transactional and bilateral. India has no interest in the region in a collective sense, in a sense of collective identity. We don't speak of the Gulf or the GCC or the Arab League or of West Asia where we can have a role. Our approach has been bilateral. All our relationships are bilateral. And what I have seen more recently is that this bilateral approach is very specifically confined to or rather directed towards corporate sector. We are more interested in promoting economic cooperation, particularly for the Indian corporate sector. So I've called this the corporatization of Indian foreign policy, where there is no question of India seeking to play a role, which many commentators have been seeking, including myself. For such a long time, I have been writing that India is a credible and welcome presence as far as peace in the region is concerned. The role that was played by China should have been played by India. We are the credible role players here. But China has looked at the region quite differently. It has very close bilateral ties, but its perception of the region has always been collective. Recall here when Xi Jinping visited the region in January 2016, he visited Tehran and Riyadh and then addressed the Arab League in Cairo. After that, when he came in December 2022 to Riyadh, in 3 days he had three summits, bilateral with Riyadh, and then he had with the GCC, and then he had with the Arab League members. So China has always had a regional approach to the region, to this. India does not. Therefore, I have sadly concluded that India has no interest whatsoever in playing a role that would promote stability and peace in the region. There's no such interest. If there was, it would have been apparent after. It's not apparent even today. We have abdicated this role uh, to the Chinese and to anyone else who wishes to play it. I regret that. Let me say, India's presence in this region goes back 5,000 years, as you well know. There's a deep empathy between the people of India and the people of this
There's
region,
been historical
exemplified
linkages.
as best by the presence of 8.5 million Indians.
Mm.
Every country in the region has a large Indian community, and you don't know what is the size of the second community. We are so many. We are the majority community in three countries. So there is a deep admiration for India, a very high regard for India, but this has never translated into India seeking to play a role that would have a strategic character for the region collectively. The kind of peace promotion role that we should have played over the last few years as relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia had deteriorated and the region was at the cusp of a major conflict. At that time, we sat it out and others came in. As the region deteriorated, it was made clear that India is not going to get in. Many of the documents that the Prime Minister signed, the joint statements the Prime Minister signed after his visits and other engagements, speak of a strategic role and a strategic partnership. And very often there are references to a regional role as well. But it has been just on paper. Today, I would say to you, with anguish, that even in a bilateral sense, we have eschewed a strategic role and we have favored a role for our corporate sector. I regret that. Corporate sector cannot play a strategic role in defense of India's interests or the promotion of our interests. They have their own
Right.
interests, which they pursue as best as they can, and they're looking mostly at the bottom line. Very rarely do they have a strategic vision or a strategic purpose. But what is worrying for me is that amidst all the major developments taking place in regional and world affairs, look at what is happening with regard to Shanghai Cooperation Organization, with regard to BRICS, with regard to West Asia, with regard to the Western Indian Ocean. We don't seem to be present in any of these major issues that should agitate us. And the main reason is, and I have mentioned this to you earlier, there is no strategic vision. There is a lot of activity as an end in itself, and a lot of loose remarks made from time to time by different people, but none of them translate into a vision.
So, but then PM did go to Ramallah, also Jerusalem. I mean, initially it was seen as if we are trying to play a role. What happened, do you
No, none
think?
of that. I don't believe that. I don't believe the Prime Minister at any time has indicated that we view West Asia as a space for a constructive strategic role by us. All of this was they were engagements in themselves. They were not part of any larger vision. As I said, our relationship with the region remains today transactional and bilateral. And that
Mhm.
is not, I don't think that has changed in any way. Nothing has changed from day. I was misled, let me tell you now, when I saw the robust engagement the Prime Minister had with West Asia from 2015 onwards, continuing till 2019. I truly believed for a while that we would now be coming in. I thought that some of the ideas that I had been presenting, I was foolish enough to believe that some of the ideas that I had been writing about in my academic papers
Mhm.
and which I had presented at various fora, let me add, uh, that they had shot home. And I was feeling pleased, but I have seen with deep disappointment that this was an illusion and that we have absolutely no interest. Even the bilateral purpose, I would have liked to see something happening. The promotion of I've recently written an article about how India should expand its maritime role in the Western Indian Ocean. Stop wasting your time in the Indo-Pacific. That doesn't matter to us. Our crucial interests are here, next door in the Arabian Sea. What are we doing about that? Should we not be engaging with the countries here, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, the countries of the Red Sea? Should we not be concerned about the security of the Red Sea and the Horn of Africa? I have been, but I have not seen anything happening. I had written a paper a short while ago about India expanding its maritime connectivity with the UAE and France. And government adopted that as a policy, and they issued a press release saying that a UAE, France, India trilateral is in place. Have you seen anything about it since then? Nothing. This is all my regret is drama as an end in itself, theater as an end in itself, not part of any larger vision of you. I have today a few days ago, written an article on India and Saudi Arabia becoming a core partners in a larger, maritime minilateral. I am worried about the Red Sea and the Horn of Africa much more than I am about the Gulf. The Gulf is more stable compared to this. You have an ongoing differences with Yemen. You have the UAE controlling many Yemeni ports. You see them controlling Socotra and Perim Island at the mouth of the Bab al Mandeb. And you look at the Horn of Africa, very, very unstable, conflictual. And it is crucial, not only for India, for the international community. It's the crucial link between Asia and Europe. But we are not there. That is
Okay.
where, in fact, when President Sisi visited India, I wrote about India, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt putting together a trilateral to safeguard our shared interests in the Red Sea and the
The
Horn of
Egyptian
Africa.
president.
Yeah, we should do that.
Mhm.
But these are all, you could say retired diplomats filling newspaper spaces.
Mhm.
I don't think none of that resonates unless you have a vision that takes into account contemporary challenges and looks at the longer term. I would like us to put together our resources. That is the strategy. Garner, firstly, be clear where you want to be. Very difficult, but yes, I think certainly with regard to our region, we have a degree of clarity. We know the challenges certainly. Put together the resources, human, technological, and financial. The resources, and then build them up over the years. Have targets. What will you achieve then? What are the actions you will be taking? Who will be your partners? Where will That is what I want to see. And I don't believe this fooling around on daily basis, reacting to something that happens with a flippant remark. That is not foreign policy, and that is not the national interest of our country.
So now lastly, to wrap up the discussion, since you're an expert and you have been observing this region so deeply, where do you see this present conflict, this sort of, where is it headed? Now, some experts are saying, mostly from the Western side, that this will go the Ukraine way and it'll, be a prolonged and a protracted conflict. But we can't afford to have that kind of a conflict in this region. So, how do you see this and where is it headed?
There is little comparison of this with Ukraine. Ukraine has its own unique dynamics connected with European affairs, the way the Cold War ended, and American interests in asserting its hegemony or across that space, and its concerns that certain West European countries could start developing strategic postures of their own, independent of the Americans. So that's a very different dynamics. This particular issue is specifically should be referred to as the Israel-Palestine issue. It is an issue that emerged in its present shape from 1948. It is an unresolved matter. It is something, if I may put it very crudely, similar to the Kashmir issue. It's an unresolved matter. As the British withdrew from the region, they left behind a legacy of sustained conflict. And the countries concerned and the peoples concerned, none of them has ever had the capacity for looking after their own security. Whether it is the Pakistanis on our western border, or you have Israel at the edge of the Mediterranean, or you have the Gulf sheikdoms, right here. So this is the legacy of the decline of colonialism. But that decline has left behind a toxic space of unresolved conflicts amongst people who are not strong enough to look after their own interests. They're constant in that fight. That is why you have external powers constantly intruding into this geopolitical space and creating murder and mayhem, aggravating murder and mayhem. I don't think that there will be truce, as there has been in the past, even after the most horrific episodes. I have argued and I believe that the Israelis, stunned and shocked by the assault upon them and the death of 1,200 of their people, this has not happened before. Israel has been up to now invincible. It's not happened. It inflicted such casualties on the other enemy. It has never suffered these casualties itself and has never experienced 150 hostages being taken. In this scenario, the Israeli government and the beleaguered armed forces will seek to extract a very high price through murder and mayhem in Gaza. But this is already going on. The massive bombardment, and you are seeing pictures of that. And I think that they will inflict several hundred casualties. We don't know how far they will go, because the Hamas have said that for every unannounced bombardment, we will kill one hostage.
One Israel, yeah.
We don't know. I have a nightmare scenario where this government, the discredited Netanyahu government and its discredited armed forces, might not bother about the hostages. I'm just worried, because they've already painted, the defense minister of Israel called the Hamas human animals and said should be treated as such, implying that you can kill at will, which is what they have been doing anyway over several years. There is also a discourse that these are ISIS savages.
Yes.
And that Pentagon has used the term ISIS savagery. Biden has used the term evil. I believe and I fear that this could indicate less sensitivity with regard to the welfare of the hostages. By painting your enemy as a barbarian, as a savage, you have restored to yourself the right to kill at will without bothering. So that once the hostages are sacrificed, you will be able to say that they were savages anyway. You couldn't have talked to them. So I think this is what is worrying me. In any case, at some stage, there will be a truce of sorts. a ceasefire of sorts. And this will be the real challenge for Israel. There will be not so much for Hamas. Hamas will go back. They will do. There will be another aspect of the reprisal, and that is the targeted killing of some of the leaders. That is already happening. They have announced today that Mohammed Deef's house was attacked. His father's house and brother has been killed. So in this way, over a period of time, certain prominent leaders will have to be killed. So you will find the Israelis then telling their people, "We have avenged you." Just like George Bush Jr. needed to do after 9/11, did carpet bombing of Afghanistan, killed several thousand people in one day, and said that I have avenged you. Where he failed was that he did not get, he was not able to kill Osama bin Laden, Mullah Omar, and Ayman Zawahiri, which is why he needed to attack Iraq and kill Saddam Hussein and execute Saddam Hussein. This is the thing. There is a severe pressure on a beleaguered political president, politically for the president, as is for the prime minister. There is a need to be able to avenge your people, particularly those who are shocked and stunned, because otherwise they'll be pointing fingers at you. I think that is going to happen. I think that's going to happen. What might I fear? Could be two scenarios here. One is that Netanyahu is brought down. He's been, if you ask me, I see him as the central villain in this whole imbroglio, and therefore seriously, personally culpable. He is the one who affiliated himself with the extreme right wing and gave them a free hand over several months against his own better judgment and against his own moderate policies in the past, cautious policies in the past. But because he's a survivor and because he believes in his own interest above everything else, he did this Faustian bargain. That is the centerpiece of this entire scenario. Therefore, he could be brought down and Israel may be ready for a new political order. We don't know. What will be the shape of that order? It will also share some of the blame for what has happened. Armed forces, intelligence, etc., senior generals will be held culpable. Inquiry commissions of inquiries will be held. But my other scenario is even more worrying for me, and that is Netanyahu may go into a shell. He may reaffirm his ties with the extreme right wing, let them go rampant, and let them pursue policies of violence in the West Bank, expand these settlements, and institutionalize the apartheid system that we had in South Africa in the 1980s, where Transkei, Ciskei, Bophuthatswana, and Venda were created, and where the majority of the 30 million in South Africa, you had 40 million people, 10 million whites and 30 million blacks. 30 million blacks were then condemned to these four homelands, living in miserable conditions. I have a fear that this is what he would like to achieve as far as the Palestinian issue is concerned, for his personal advantage and personal benefit. Now, is there something that we can think out of the box? I have tried my best to do that. I have, if I may use Martin Luther King's language, forgive me, I have a dream also for West Asia and for this. And that is, at some stage, the Israelis decide, particularly young people, that this situation is unacceptable. At the end of the day, we 6 million Jews and these 7-8 million Palestinians, we are foster brothers. We are half brothers. If Abraham is our shared father, we are half brothers. And that this land belongs to both of us. And we'll need to live side by side. So if you want to have an Abraham Accord that is genuinely honest and credible, that is the accord we should be looking at, not these agreements that have been opportunistic agreements that we've had. That is the Abraham Accord I'm looking for, where the Palestinian and the Jew live side by side in one land, support each other's interests, and make the country a truly peaceful entity. That is what I'm looking for.
Sure, sir. Thank you very much. That was Ambassador Talmiz Ahmad. He was India's former ambassador to Saudi Arabia twice and an expert on West Asia, talking to us and telling us the ongoing crisis that is happening between Israel and Palestine, and hopefully there could be some truce. With camera person Naman Mehra, this is Nayanima Basu for ABP Live.